Welcome to the AI First Business Podcast with Tina Yazdi, where we show you how teams, companies, and leaders are turning AI hype into ROI.
Why don't we start with introductions? I'd love if you said a few sentences about yourself and your background, how you got to starting Keeper, like what you're up to now, and then also a little bit about Keeper and what Keeper's doing in whatever terms you think are best representing what you guys do.
Sounds great. Hi, everyone. My name is Paul. I'm a founder and CEO at Keeper. I spent the early part of my career as a product manager at various San Francisco-based venture-backed Series A through G startups. And then I sort of went from big to small. Started at Microsoft, went smaller. Tina and I met back at Amplitude, and then eventually started my own. Keeper was founded 5 years ago. Keeper is AI-based tax filing software. Our value proposition is that there's just a lot of complexity that rules-based software can't handle when it comes to individual tax preparation. And AI is very good at it. So we can talk about ways in which that's true and things we've learned over the years, but that's the quick blurb.
Awesome. Thank you for that quick intro. The purpose of this podcast is to help give listeners tangible examples from the field of founders and leaders who are working with AI technology in like a business setting. So I guess like that's kind of the angle we're going to come at this from. When we were catching up, you gave some examples about how that applies to Keeper. But just what we didn't have a chance to chat about is I'd love to get your thoughts on the overall landscape of adding AI technology to like B2C products like Keeper or fintech in general. I'm curious if you have any thoughts about that, maybe trends you've observed, like things you've seen work really well or fail.
Yeah. I think it's worth starting from a historical standpoint, right? We started the business in 2019. In 2019, I would have grouped AI in the same bucket as, and I'm going to get some flack for this, but like crypto and Internet of Things and, NFTs. Sorry, I'm just going to say it. That's my opinion. And I would have said, okay, yeah, sure, AI is fine, but it's at best sort of a COGS reduction methodology. It helps you scale operations. That's what AI is good for. And I looked at companies that brand themselves as AI-based companies, a little bit as like, you do you, like play the game, whatever it takes. But I sort of, when we started Keeper, my co-founder and I were very explicit about not wanting to be one of those, so sort of be tacky in that way, quote unquote, because at the time it felt very tacky. We did build ultimately what we were trying to do was a non-rules based system, a complex system that had to have a machine learning backend, but we never tried to position it. Yeah,
just for someone who may not have encountered that term before, what is a non-rules based system referring to?
So I would say software starting from the late 90s and the 2000s is mostly rules-based. So you would have a series of if-then statements, if you will. If this is true, then this should happen. And that's great because it's deterministic, meaning that you always know based on the inputs, you know exactly what the outputs are going to be. And it's how a lot of industries were built up, and the tax preparation industry is one of them. If you answer this question like this, then ask this following question. I would say we kind of peaked, we reached this moment in software development where we kind of hit this wall of what rules-based could really do, because there does come a point of complexity where if there are too many options, if there are too many paths, you can't build a rules-based system. And so what happens if you can't build a system for it is you have to like create structure for the user, and you have to basically force them to answer questions in your order, and so that your rules-based system can deal with it. Basically, what happened after that is some of the bigger companies started doing it in the 2000s. Everyone started doing it in 2010s. Where
just as an aside, do any examples come to mind that you're thinking of
for rules-based software?
Yeah, from like the 2000s.
Yeah, I mean, well, frankly, for my industry, I'm thinking of TurboTax. So for our American listeners, TurboTax is a great example of seeing probably one of the most complex consumer rules-based systems ever built. They took the entire tax code and they built if-then statements, to solve individual tax preparation. And they did it magnificently, I would say. They did such a great job with that. And they sort of built around all the limitations of rules-based software in the best way that I think you can, which is to have basically very like a series of if-then questions and a very complex logic around like skipping certain questions if they answer a certain way. But they've built up you can imagine the team there. You have to hire 10,000 engineers because you need to maintain a crazy set of these if-then statements and logic and QA and all these things.
Got it. And you and your co-founder are entering this landscape with a fresh pair of eyes. And just as an aside, you used the term tacky earlier. For the sake of business decorum, shall we use the word novelty instead of that?
Novelty, yeah. And I actually mean that in a historic sense. I think it used to be...
and what do you mean by like the term tacky? Like, what are you thinking?
Yeah.
Because so basically, I think of like fashion.
Yeah, you're right. Maybe that wasn't the right... Well, okay, so here's what I mean. So maybe 2018, it felt like there are certain businesses that have real AI application. Like if you're Google and you have the kind of data that Google has and you want to identify faces in Google Photos, great, that's AI. That's like a legitimate use case for AI. If you want to do fraud detection at a massive bank, like great, legitimate use case for machine learning. But like most businesses didn't have the scale nor the real need to use AI, but we would kind of say it anyway, just to, because it was in vogue. And that's what I mean by tacky. I would say pre-2018, there were enough barriers and the technology wasn't good enough that I think it was a common sort of fundraising strategy to say that you are an AI startup, but really just be a regular business that uses some AI to basically reduce COGS.
And when you and your co-founder, it was 4 years ago that you founded Keeper. Just going back to you're coming in with a fresh pair of eyes, you want to build a non-rules-based system. At that time, what was like the frame of reference that you were entering this industry based on?
This is going to get a little bit technical and industry specific, so bear with me.
Taking notes.
Sorry?
I'm taking notes. Don't worry.
Taking notes, yeah. So
yeah.
in the world of, small business accounting, there is this need to track expenses. You do this because you ultimately want to claim your expenses as tax-deductible business expenses on your taxes, reduces your tax bill, everyone's happy, right? So this problem space was traditionally solved using rules-based software where, you can imagine what it looks like. It's a list of transactions, and then you have to go through and tell the system, okay, this one is a deduction and it should be in this category. That was kind of the state-of-the-art solution to that problem. We sort of approached this space knowing that that rules-based system had a lot of limitations for a particular demographic of Americans. People who didn't have the kind of knowledge or expertise, tax expertise, or maybe advice that would allow them to know, okay, this is, what's a deduction and which category should it fall in? What am I eligible for? And so those people were systematically being overlooked and frankly not claiming nearly the number of deductions that they're eligible for. And so we set out the sort of bold mission of Keeper in the early days was, let's solve just that one problem by building a machine learning, an AI system instead of a rules-based system, something that could actually tell you what's a write-off and categorize it for you instead of you having to tell it.
I got it. So you were already thinking of using like machine learning and AI. That was kind of the foundation upon which Keeper was built on from a technical perspective.
That's right. So these were early days. I mean, obviously machine learning was fairly advanced at this stage. So, but it was LLMs were just coming on the scene. So we were one of OpenAI's first customers for GPT-3, and we used that for transaction cleaning and stuff. But it's an example of the kind of AI system that was like buildable 5 years ago, where it had to be very niche, it had to be very specific. You had to say, I want to solve this particular problem, and you had to build a bunch of infrastructure around that problem to be able to apply AI to it. I would say a lot of that has changed with these more like, obviously they're not general intelligence, but these more generally intelligent models that we've been seeing over the past year.
So pivoting from there, thank you for giving kind of like a context of the world that you entered building Keeper in 4 or 5 years ago. And what are you seeing today in contrast to the world you described just now?
I would say this started about a year ago, right? When the GPT-3 was cool, I think people knew that it was cool and it was interesting. But then when it was the modality changed to ChatGPT, and then especially when GPT-4 came out, I think the world did change. And I think all of us in tech and outside of tech realized that this thing is going to happen faster than we thought, and that it is time to rethink the way we build product and the kind of products we build, even for consumers, not just back office optimizations, not just, specific problems like fraud detection, just the regular interface that you are designing. It needs to be rethought around this new paradigm.
And within Keeper, we talked a little bit about the impact this has had on your product development process in the last year. What are some changes, particularly ones that you couldn't have anticipated, and some of like the consequences or benefits of those changes?
This is, I think, back to the world we inhabit, which is this tax preparation world. There's all these federal rules around the credits you can claim and the rules, that dictate those. And then there's state rules on top of that. Traditionally, to build a system that can actually handle all of that complexity requires having people who basically code tax law into your system and update that every year. Millions of if-then statements for every credit and how much it's worth and, what happens if you claim yes on this and no on that. And it was very difficult to do in a rules-based way. And that was a big part of Intuit's moat, or just the moat that was built up by these tax companies that did the work. And I would say one example of how that's changed with LLMs is you can basically leapfrog all of those if-then statements now. I'm oversimplifying. I think you still have to build some infrastructure, but you can basically, like, all this logic that had to be built in the past can be skipped over if you basically do the right embeddings for your LLM. The most specific example I can give is this. Help centers are like this. Everybody has a help center. Like, it's a way to prevent support from getting inundated, and it's great. But it's not fun for the consumer because they are Yahoo before Google. Like, they have to go and find the item or like search for it or whatever. It's a great example of where LLMs just reinvent that paradigm. As a user interface, you don't know where the user is headed when they enter a help center. You don't know what exactly they're looking for. It was very difficult to build an if-then system or rules-based system to solve their problem. But with an LLM, it can basically handle enough of the logic to be like, just type your problem, get the answer, get the solution. I think that's one example where you can think about that problem as a microcosm of the bigger, like, tax preparation problem. When you engage with an accountant rather than a software, you don't want to go in order. You want to start by saying, listen, I'm really worried about my stock option grants at this company. I don't know how. I think I haven't been paying taxes on them. Like, can you help me? You want to start your own pace. Exactly. You want to start your own pace. You want to go out of order. You want them to sort of solve your problem and not... imagine if you walked into an accountant's office and they were like, all right, first name, all right, last name, tax deposit status, address. Yeah, exactly. I would leave. Like, and so the very kind of easy way to explain AI-based software is now you can build software that behaves like a human, that can go out of order, can make assumptions on your behalf, doesn't have to be a bunch of if-then statements.
So a couple of questions around that. One of the things that you referred to is the rules-based moat that Intuit had built with TurboTax, and how Keeper, one of the things that was built on the back of was taking a totally different approach to building a system that could be built by a much smaller and more nimble team. Given that you already had that built into your infrastructure and how you do things, with the rapid improvement of the technology in the last year or so, was there anything that in the work that you had done to build Keeper that became redundant in the last year, like even for you guys? And is there anything that you had to like rapidly iterate on, discard, or implement to take advantage of or like get ahead of the technology?
Yeah, I think it might be easier to show than tell in this case. So let me pull up one of our product managers put together a vision doc, which I think will help explain.
I love the good vision doc.
Yeah. This is all hot off the press, right? I think a lot of this stuff wasn't possible until March when GPT-4 was released. I would say like 3 and 3.5 weren't good enough to do this kind of thing. So, I think the whole world is figuring this out together right now. Let me just see.
We're figuring these are right now.
Yeah, exactly. Some of these docs are going to be, I hope that they'll be understandable for someone external.
Do you want to just, for a little context for someone watching this, can you maybe give a quick overview? What is a product vision document, and what is like the role it plays in how you guys develop product?
In general, when you scale a business beyond the point where, you as the founder make all the product decisions, you have to have a way to, checks and balances for delegation. And documentation is a great way to do that. Like the sort of dumb way to do that, or like the way that I call it dumb, but I think it's also quite standard, is to just kind of like force a bunch of meetings and checkpoints on your product development team. So to say, okay, before you have to have a final review by me before this gets shipped, and here, you have one slot a week where you present all your stuff, and then I have the veto power. That's inefficient, and it causes a bunch of issues. And so we have a series of asynchronous communication systems that we use. One of them is a vision doc that allows us to maintain alignment without slowing down the design and development process. A vision doc is like the most abstract kind of like, don't worry about the details, but let's get aligned on where we're headed 6 months, a year, 2 years down the line. Basically ensures that there aren't these down the line, oh man, we have very different expectations of where we're headed kind of situations.
Yeah, cool. And what is this one that you're showing us on this call?
You'll have to kind of get into our world for a second. So
okay,
this is the new, this is the vision doc. But what I'm going to again just ask you to imagine, last time you filed a TurboTax, or it's probably similar in other countries as well, where you have the tax filing experience is this kind of intense navigation flow where it's got, let me show, we have one of those. Yeah, sure. So it's like one of these, right? It shows you, there's
literally
8 sections.
Exactly.
And every
in the Netherlands. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. You have 8 sections, and every section has, 4 subsections, and you have to go linearly, and you can't unlock the next section until you finish this section. And it's sort of this like, it's framed as this necessary evil. And it's how every rules-based software has to work. And this is what we built initially because, there was no other option. And it has all these downsides because I might not want to go in order. This is just a lot of clicking. It's a lot of like clicking the next button. If there's no way for rules-based software to effectively skip anything, right? So you have to use completeness as a proxy for accuracy. You have to ask whether they made out-of-state purchases in Nevada this year, because if you don't ask, then who knows? Then you could be wrong and you could be liable. That's very different than the accountant experience, where with an accountant, you step into their office and you tell them a little bit about yourself, give them all your stuff, right? You drop off all your documents. Then the accountant goes through and just like prepares your return based on everything you've told them. And then you have this kind of like check stage at the end where you can say, oh, actually, one other thing I remembered, I did make an out-of-state purchase in Nevada. But because the accountant is intelligent, they can make a bunch of those assumptions for you and then surface the ones that need your attention in a way that saves you work and makes you feel less stressed and all these things. And so that's what, when GPT-4 was released and the whole world realized the power of AI and how quickly it was advancing.
And just to highlight, like the stakes are high here, like, because if you misfile your taxes or make a mistake, like there can be pretty serious consequences, I imagine, for that.
Of course. Yeah, these are the
like
serious
consequences. High confidence and...
Totally. And this is like one of the reasons why I would say even the investor community, even today, I think still treats our industry as one where, well, like, one day AI will do this, but obviously not yet. It's a very interesting kind of paradigm where I think people love talking about AI hallucination and how like, oh, well, it's great for social apps or whatever, but like we can't use it for finances. This is a little bit of a tangent, but we don't hold that belief. We have done extensive studies and blind testing that shows that our AI is more accurate than 80% of human tax professionals, licensed tax professionals, in blind testing. It's like, so we have a very different belief. I think we can talk about sort of that in more detail, but the stakes are high here.
Is that research that's publicly available, or is that kind of an...
It is. Yeah, we published it. It's called AI Accountant. It's our second version of the AI Accountant that we published on our site. So if you go to keepertax.com, you scroll down to the bottom, click on the research section, you'll see it there.
Yeah. Well,
and maybe we can loop back on that.
Okay, so you have your vision document. What we're looking at right now is the materialization of this belief that you have that AI can indeed handle something of this nature. It sounds like that's what we're looking at.
We're looking at a replacement. So I just showed the navigation experience where it's the standard, like the 7 sections with...
Yeah, that was the before.
Yeah. And this is a replacement for that experience that we think we can... we've already built most of it basically, and we're going to launch it this upcoming tax season and make this the primary way that people do their taxes with Keeper. Rather than going in order and forcing you to answer your questions, there's basically an assistant that lives on the right, which answers your questions up front. Oh, you have capital loss carryover. Like, here's what that means. Don't worry, you can we'll ask you about it later. And then you just drop off all your stuff. It basically does your taxes. It basically prepares your return in a way that looks like, where is it? The end result is like this. So you basically you upload all your forms, you answer those initial questions. There's clarifying questions that we then ask based on the information. And then you get this, what is effectively a completed tax return, which you're just double checking the same way that you would with an accountant. And then we, of course, pull in a human at the end to do the actual final review. It's sort of the experience all of a sudden mimics that of having an accountant. Yeah, that's the idea.
When we were catching up in preparation of this call, you said something that made me really laugh, which is the AI assistant experience is kind of like Clippy, which for some of the younger listeners, they might not know what that is. Do you want to explain what Clippy is and what your observations have been, users react, like how they react to an AI assistant? And also, because it sounds like what you just walked us through is the outcome of a lot of testing and research that you guys did. But what are some of the things that you encountered while building what we just took a look at?
I think let's like go back in time to March of this year, where everybody was aflame with LLMs, and every company was making, us included, was like sending notes to the board talking about how this is going to change the trajectory of the business and all this stuff. And so, like a lot of other businesses, we sat down as a leadership team and as a company overall, and we're like, okay, let's rethink everything. And I would say we were pretty naive. We did all the cliche kind of, I would say, we made all the cliche mistakes that I would imagine a lot of us made in those early days.
I'm dying to get into those cliche mistakes, but before we do, I think there's something that's worth acknowledging, which is that it's remarkable at how quickly you even took the step to have a meeting about it at all. I think there's a lot of leaders out there who might not have been so quick.
Yeah.
What were the signals to you guys that you should take it seriously and sit down, however naively, and have a conversation about it?
I appreciate you framing that as if we're geniuses. I think the reality is it's just different when you're a 23-person company versus we have only upside, whereas you have infinite downside if you're running a much bigger organization. And so it's just the dynamics are different. For us, we have essentially nothing to lose, and the way we saw it is there's a chance that this thing is the future, and we want to be on the bleeding edge of that future. And if we're wrong, then it's okay. Like yes, we spent time doing it, but that's what a startup is all about. Those are the bets you take. We have 40,000 paying customers. It's not like obviously we don't want to lose them, but we also don't show Wall Street that we're going to grow 20% this year or whatever. That's probably the reasoning there. I think if you're a leader at a big organization, the discussion is very different. And I think it's probably right to sit on the sidelines a little bit, keep an eye on things, and decide when you want to jump in. And probably that time is now, but it's for Intuit to do what we're doing and to say, okay, let's rethink everything. I'm sure they're having those conversations, but to actually implement it is a whole other
is a different thing.
Piece.
Although, do you think, of course, not at the organizational level, but companies of that scale might have 23-person teams, right? That could potentially have implemented something as a test, and I'm sure they are. And I'm talking to some of them as well on this podcast.
Yeah.
Examples like yours are like tangible inspiration and what do you call them? Like guiding light posts? What's that?
I guess we have it a lot easier. We don't have these massive internal compliance organizations and stakeholder management and, politics. We have things a lot easier than I would say if you're an entrepreneur. And hats off to entrepreneurs. I mean, I love, it's super important. But it's a very different job, and with I would say more challenges than being an entrepreneur in that sense.
No, that's really also a fair acknowledgement. So getting back to the topic at hand. So it's March. You get together, you sit down, you assess, and shall we dive into all the? I'll learn what we had from that process. Okay, let's go.
I wonder if, I sort of acknowledge that this stuff might be harder to, I hope that it basically makes sense for someone external. Basically, what I'm going to flip through are a bunch of examples of like, oh boy, if we just, added GPT-4 here and there, and what if we stopped having help articles at all? And what if we just, instead of having, buttons with predetermined text, let's generate the text, on the fly, depending on what the user answered in previous questions. Like there was all this, thinking around reinventing everything. And then I would say we landed on a thing that I think was a classic mistake that I've heard a lot of other product people talk about in the space, where we said, okay, LLMs are really powerful. what if we replaced our, core UI flows with a chat experience, which is a great sort of input mechanism into an LLM. And so we had we had a single prompt. You can see it here. You are a friendly and concise tax prep software called Keeper, blah, blah, blah. And you need to onboard this customer, and we give very specific things that it needs to ask, and then it outputs a JSON file that then gets used in the UI. And we thought, this is amazing. We're going to basically recreate the full accountant experience, the walk into the office and tell them about yourself experience. And we launched it, and basically it performed 80% worse than our UI flow, where, the standard thing you would expect, where we have to ask 7 questions and we have a UI that just asks those 7 questions.
So coming from a product analytics background, I'm sure you dug into that one. What room?
Yeah. It's basically just all on the first screen. People don't want to chat. People don't like to chat. Typing with your thumbs is a lot of work. People don't want to do it.
To the Clippy.
Yeah, and this is the Clippy thing where I think there were two.
And just to explain what Clippy is, Clippy, which I will put a link to, was a mascot of Microsoft Word in the 90s and early 2000s. It was a little paper clip, and it had arms, legs, and eyes. And it jumped in at the most inopportune moments to help you. And it was really hard to get it out of the screen. It was always in the way. So it was just a really painful UI experience for most people. And it became a caricature of badly designed software that's trying to help and making things worse. That's what we need by Clippy.
Exactly. So
we're too young to remember.
Yeah, and the reason I bring that up is because I think we have, all of us, even if we didn't grow up in the 90s or whatever, have this ingrained set of patterns around helpful, quote unquote, smart assistants that basically say these things are BS. They're not as they pretend to be. And
hundreds of personal experiences we've all had, right?
Totally. And my banking app has a smart assistant, and I don't want to talk to their smart assistant because it's not actually smart. So I think all of us that are building with this new wave of LLMs have to contend with that background of everyone who is seeing this has been burned before. You cannot tell, you have to show. You cannot tell them, oh, this time it's going to be different. People have very short sort of attention spans and are not willing to do that kind of thing. And so what was happening is, as soon as they saw the way we introduce it here in this this first iteration was, welcome to Keeper, I'm an AI. And that was immediately people were turned off. People were
nope. We lost. Yeah.
You lost. And so that
almost like a disclaimer, this is an AI. This is going to be
this is
we've already told you it's an AI. Yeah.
Yes, get ready to have your time wasted. People would not write comments would not respond to it in a way that they would have talked to a human. They would give these.
So there's kind of a lacking trust, or.
Yeah, it was the way you treat a dumb robot, right? It's they would just have one word responses.
Yeah. Just to dig into that, I think there's the wave of chatbots in 2010s or so. And if I'm not mistaken, those were if-then rules-based systems, right? And I think that definitely trained a cohort of people to speak to systems like that in a certain way, because you preemptively try to word it to get through the system and get to a person.
You get the keyword. It's
you're a person, agent. I'm old.
Agent.
That's agent. Just that personal curiosity. Is this system that you built subject to similar limitations, or is it actually totally not the case? And I could have talked to it I speak to a person and it would have had the responses. Can you share more about
the limitation?
How did you end up making a decision about rolling it back or keeping it? Now that you're bringing back a system like this, what are some of the ways that you trust back with users to attract with something like this and have them rely on it and accept it and not delete their account with Keeper?
I'll answer those one by one. Okay. I think they're all great questions.
Okay.
Basically, the TLDR of this experiment is massive failure. People don't want to chat. There's a place for UI. Basically, was the insight. Was UI is there for a reason.
It looks the same. Yeah, it looks the same as a rules-based system, but it operates totally differently behind the scenes, right?
Totally.
People don't know that.
AI only helpful if the problem that needs to be solved is complex enough. Basically, if you're just trying to ask the 7 questions of an onboarding flow, then you don't need AI. You should just ask those 7 questions. It's your outputs are only as interesting as your inputs. And so by the time you bring in AI, there better be very complex inputs, basically. That was the overarching insight.
Okay. And I think that's a really powerful one. It's coming up across a lot of different conversations as well. the output input point. I think that's actually a great pivot to the second topic that we covered. Sorry, did you have an additional thought?
Would it be helpful to give you the follow-up iterations, or is that where you're headed?
Yeah.
Because we iterated it three times and basically got to where we are today, and I can tell that story.
Yeah, just as an aside, I think one of the comments that you made is, I hope this makes sense to someone externally. I think like one of my goals of creating this content for the internet is to show people that it's messy and complicated, and there is not like a checklist. Like, this is what it really looks like behind the scenes. Because I think a lot of people gaslight themselves that they don't know what they're talking about, or AI is not something that they're like technical enough to understand. And I think what I'm trying to promote in my own little way, from my philosophical standpoint, is that I think more people, if you see some examples of how it's like really working on the ground, like I'm hoping it gives people confidence in the work that they're doing. Like, oh, it's just like this, like my work is also messy, but so is this like successful companies. That's kind of, so yes, I think that's actually an excellent story.
Sure.
Maybe you can, like, if you have any thoughts about that, feel free to share.
I mean, frankly, like LLMs they're the easiest thing ever. There's like no barrier to entry with LLMs. Like the first system we designed was a single prompt system. It had no embeddings. It was not fine-tuned. There was no like agent of agents model, and it worked pretty well. Like, you know, you can launch your business off of that. Like all the fanciness does the like incremental, 20%, but you can get the 80-20 in a day. I think that's fair. Yeah. So this was version 2. We were like, okay, so maybe, we shouldn't just replace all our UI with chat. Maybe we should have LLMs play.
Just as an aside, to like contextualize this, because I'm going to put markers and an explanation in the podcast description, because I didn't realize there's 3 iterations. Can you just quickly recap?
Yeah. Like
overall, like there was 3 iterations of the product, and where in the story we are now, just so I can include it for context.
March, GPT-4 comes out, world is ablaze. Iteration 1 came like immediately, like in April we had version 1 out, where we did this dumb chatboarding. We call it chatboarding, like chat-based onboarding. Can we just replace UI with AI? And the answer was no. Iteration 2 came over the summer, around June, where we said, okay, so maybe AI, maybe UI still has a place in the world, but what about if we put an assist, like basically treated it as an assistant, let it do what it's best at, which is this like complex input, complex output model, and allow the UI to do its job and had it be there for things that the UI couldn't do. And so this is a very common use case where you get to a screen in our tax filing flow and you're like, oh shoot, can I claim my daughter's boyfriend who lives in my home as a dependent? And like trying to solve that with, trying to add like a button for that question in a rules-based software is silly. And so having a sort of an LLM, an AI-based system solve that problem is really good. And so we have this AI assistant. It can see what you're seeing on your screen. So it knows that you're being asked about your dependents. It's sort of, we ask it to generate pre-filled questions so that the user can have, inspiration for what to ask. It's much more effective basically at supplementing the things that UI does well rather than trying to replace. Make sense?
Yes. So this is iteration 2. And so you released this into the wild, and what did you learn?
This is the big Clippy comment. You'll notice the way it's introduced is, hey Maddie, I'm an AI assistant powered by the collective intelligence of keeper accountants and tens of thousands of previously filed returns. Right? So we were obsessed with I would say tell instead of show. And so we tried a lot of iterations of this where, internally we had already released AI Accountant V2. We knew it was more accurate than 80% of human accountants. So we were feeling very confident and very excited about it. And we were trying to tell the user about that they should trust the system. It's not just a dumb chatbot. But what we found over and over again is like, they just, as soon as you say like, hi, I'm an AI, like, Siri, like Cortana, Clippy, all these things come up in the user's mind, and right away, rightfully so, they're like, yeah, I don't trust it. Like if I tell Siri to do something in settings, it's like, it replies like, I can't do that. And it's like, well, it's just like every little moment like that erodes my trust in chatbots. And so we still had this wall where we felt like users were not utilizing the functionality, the power of the functionality to the extent that they could. They had the questions, they just thought that based on sort of pattern matching that this wouldn't solve their problem. So that brings us to iteration number 3. Iteration number 3 is again, this is all hot off the press. This is something that is going live shortly. But the idea is very different. It's rather than trying to say, hey, this is a chatbot, aren't we cool? Like this technology is really interesting. We sort of make peace with the fact that the user doesn't care what is solving their problem. They care about their problem being solved. So what we do is we basically we had this experience inside of our app, which allowed the user to ask questions. In the past, we had a separate place to go for AI questions, and a different place for human questions. And it kind of devalued the AI experience and people didn't want to use it. And so we said, instead of that, we said, okay, let's just solve their problem, which is they have a question. And let's solve it in a way that is best for them, which they may not realize is actually oftentimes the AI answer. And so we introduced this concept of a group chat where, we have an AI, we basically add an AI agent into the chat. The person who you're assigned to as like an account manager is still there, but answers, in the way that a human does, which is to say with latency, right? So if you do want the human to reply, the human is going to be, pulled in, but it's going to take them some time to actually get to it. And so this is what I mean by show, not tell. So basically, you're going to get an incredible answer from the AI, and you may still want to just get, the human to confirm, but then the human will confirm. And then you do that 2 more times, and then you get to a point where you're like, you know what? I get, like, this is a better experience. Like, I don't necessarily need the human to wait for the human to confirm every time. Like, the AI is so good at explaining this stuff, and it's so effective at solving my problems. And so we sort of circumvented the horn tooting that I think is very easy to get stuck in when you're building with hot new technology, so that we basically underplay it. We don't make the technology the central component of what's going on. We make the user problem the central component, and when we happen to solve it, we show them that the solution is really great rather than trying to tell them. So that's the...
And just, sorry, going back to the intro of this iteration 3, what are the names? So Caitlin is the person, just out of curiosity, and is it AI assistant and Caitlin, or how do you introduce the two again?
That's right, yeah. So it's a group chat.
The wording around that. Sorry, this AI is fine-tuned to answer. Okay, so it's totally different.
Yes. Because
before you did a personification where it had a name called Maddie, it introduced itself in first person. This is a different.
Yes. No personification.
No personification.
There doesn't need to be why, there was this kind of I just want my question answered. And so we've sort of taken that away. We've sort of stripped it down to just the value. And then we've also taken away this need for, we don't ever, there was this debate around, do we add a button which says have Caitlin verify this, have my bookkeeper verify this. And we moved away from that because it just sort of establishes a pattern that we think we don't want to establish in the user's mind. Like they can ask Caitlin to confirm something, but to have a button that constantly sits next to the answer makes it seem like this needs to be double checked. Whereas we're building a system that I guess the whole underlying insight here is this AI system performs better than, on average, than the humans that we employed on this problem space because it's really effective. It has all the embeddings. It knows, it has all the latest product information stored inside of it. It knows everything. It makes fewer mistakes than the human would.
I think what's really remarkable, and thank you for sharing, honestly, these examples from the field, from real product development learnings that you've had in your team. I think what strikes me here is that there's a lot of chatter online. And just as an aside, I thought of some additional questions that are is not in the topics that we covered. And my questions are around jobs, employment, finding teams that are working on products that you're building, and also maybe some tips you have for leaders and founders out there. So I just have some questions around that, if that's okay.
Of course. Yeah, sounds great.
But just to have an observation, sorry, I lost my train of thought. The observation is that what I would call panic, overwhelm, that I've observed in leaders and people who are working in tech about AI is going to steal your jobs. I think the kind of unsexy truth in the field is that you still have to follow product development hygiene. And it's not just the technology that you need to consider, but the user's assumptions and trust and experiences with it. Just because the technology is like so much like faster and more capable of doing so many more things, it doesn't mean that it suddenly magically solves like every technical and user experience problem that has ever existed, right?
I think that's right. I mean, with respect to AI solving your jobs, one way to think about it is what we've seen in tech over the past 20 years, where is kind of that, like, what happens with these big tech companies, the improving product is just a great investment. And so you hire people up to the amount that you can afford to, basically. You basically hire as many engineers as you can, and without it feeling like, oh boy, I'm going to really let burn rate get ahead of me. Because there's this fundamental truth, which is that, like, it's not like you have this quota of features that I only want to ship 10 features this year. Of course not. If you could have your way, you would ship 100 features, 1,000 features. And so it's not like there's not a limited pool of value that I think a lot of our jobs create. I think the reality is we're just going to create, a single person is just going to create more value. And that's great. That's great for every business. And like, the world will be better because of it. Products will be better. Like, people will not do jobs that are frankly super boring. They'll do jobs that are more interesting. Like, I think that the people often leap to, it's going to replace me. I think there's a really important long intermediary step, which is that it is going to make me more effective. And a single person is going to be able to do much more than they used to be able to do. For most functions that are not quota based, maybe the one exception being like inbound customer support, where there is just, I don't need to do more support than I get tickets. But like almost every other role, it's like, well, if you could do more sales, then great. If you can build more features, then great. Those jobs are fine, in my opinion. Like, I think those people should just leverage the AI, become more efficient, and I don't think there's anything to worry about. That's my little, I'm not a philosopher on the future of AI, but that's my little shtick.
In addition to kind of your thoughts on the impact on the job market, especially in tech, do you have any thoughts or advice for maybe other founders of companies that are maybe a bit younger than yours? They just started in the last couple of years, or maybe up and coming founders that want to start a company using AI technology as their main infrastructure? Do you have any like advice maybe around product development best practices, how to build a team that's capable of building these technologies, how to lead teams like this? Any, like, I'm just kind of shooting things that might trigger some thoughts. I have no idea what your thoughts are on it.
Yeah. At this point, I am a believer in this AI trend. And I think that if you are trying to build a rules-based system in 2023, 2024, you better have a really good answer for why in the past 25 years, like, this business couldn't be built. Because rules-based software, we have like scraped the bottom of that barrel. Like, there has been a lot of rules-based software startups that have been tried to be built. And so you better have there are reasons why that could be the case. Maybe there's some regulatory change, but there better be some very compelling reason why it's not just the software is better, because it's very unlikely that that's the case. But so that's why I think, like, if you try to just approach an industry that has a bunch of rules-based software and try to say, okay, what would happen if we built it from scratch, from the ground up, using AI? I think that's a good place to start. This is a unique window in history. Maybe it would have been better to start 6 months ago, but still, but still, there is this window where I would say there is a good compelling reason why no one has done this yet, and it's just time. Whereas that's probably not the case if you're just building a more traditional software business.
Got it. And in terms of kind of building a team that's capable of not only building the technology itself, but being mindful of the user experience and the user perception of the interactions they're having with your technology. Do you have any thoughts or advice around that? Like, what's been your personal philosophy as you're building Keeper?
Yeah, I guess it really depends on who your target customer is. If it's really fun to sell to nerds, like if you sell to kind of people who want AI, who like somehow value that, then great, lean into it. Like, call it, make your background black and your text white, and make it all like, use cool techie illustrations, whatever. Like, that's fine. And say that you're an AI company. But if you're selling to people who, frankly, may see that as a downside, then I think you should lean into that. I mean, it's telling that the company that is driving all of this, OpenAI, is not, if you look at the way they position themselves, they're the most AI company of all, and they're like lifestyle images and like white background and like just, we solve problems. It's I would just be very careful about if you're trying to sell to consumers, like, just because you think the tech is cool, that doesn't mean your user does, basically.
That's really fair. So I think my hypothesis is one type of listener might be people who are considering how to pivot their career to be kind of at the forefront of these technologies. Do you have any advice for maybe like a young engineer or someone looking to join a team like Keeper? How do you find companies like yours? How do you, do you have any advice on how to assess the hygiene? A company someone might be interested. Is it a company, like, is there hygiene there, or are they just using AI as like a novelty?
Tina, you and I are, maybe a decade into our career, so I think we've made enough mistakes to sort of know why that's so important. Obviously, if you're coming out of school or, you're switching industries, I think it's just very tricky to know the right questions to ask. If you're joining certainly a startup, there's a good chance that the person is a professional pitcher. They're very good at making it sound good. And it's very easy to, if you're conflict averse, which most of us are, to kind of just nod along and just like give them the benefit of the doubt. And the more that you can just ask for details, like I love a candidate who asked me for our data room, who's just like, can you show me the financials? Can you walk me through the investor, like the financials that you share with the board? Like that is a plus, not a minus. You are not being annoying. This is an important decision. Obviously that starts to become less possible if it's a bigger company, but certainly you can kind of do the analogous thing for, at bigger organizations as well. If you don't feel like you have the expertise, if you're super new and you don't quite have the expertise to make that assessment, find someone who's, 5 years ahead and can make that assessment for you. I think you can ask someone to create a list of questions for you at the stage at which you're being sold at the end. If you get the offer, you can ask whatever you want. And it's very tempting to just take whatever off, you've been through a grind and it was a lot of work, but there's enough, especially now, the boom times, 2020, 2021, gave rise to a bunch of very unhygienic businesses, candidly. And so there is a good chance that a business that has raised a lot of money, that it sounds like they have all their stuff together, really doesn't, and is just in a death spiral. And so I would just be very careful and do whatever you can to de-risk that. Yeah, I mean, with respect to Keeper, we're hiring. You can go to keepertax.com and there's we're hiring section. We hire, but in general, to find companies like us, the YC community is good. So the work at a startup.com site is
were
very
you
effective.
in YC?
We were.
We're in YC. Yeah, I remember this now. Yes.
Yeah. We don't hire people off of platforms like hired.com and, LinkedIn and stuff, because we find that, especially in this market, there's a type of candidate that just wants a job, right? That just needs income. And I don't think that's I think that's totally fine. And, I'm nothing against that, but I don't think it's the right candidate for the stage of business we're at. And so, so we try to look for people who self-select. And so self-selection happens if you go to a platform that specifically helps you recruit for startups. And so we use AngelList, which is called Wellfound now, and then we use
your secrets away, huh?
Well, it's not a secret. I mean, yeah. But I think knowing that as a candidate, like, it's just, we just aren't going to rely on LinkedIn, because 99 out of 100 applicants there are just not fit with the background. If you're looking for a different experience, those are great platforms. If you're looking for something more, you're less interested in,
like, maybe more structure,
career growth.
Yeah.
If you're less interested in career growth and more interested in, pure security, I think that's fine. And that's admirable, but like, probably don't go to a startup. That's the trade-off you're making if you join an early stage.
For sure. Yeah. And I just want to circle back to something you mentioned earlier, which is your thoughts that AI-enabled workplace changes will help people be more efficient and do more good work in what they're already doing, rather than replace them. And I'm just curious, do you have some examples from your personal life and work where AI has helped you do more and be more of Paul? And I'm just curious so what they are. Whether it's your personal or work life.
That's interesting. I mean, that was the other in vogue thing to do back in March, is to like make your new Chrome tab, the GPT-4 platform or whatever, and just like to use it to plan your, honeymoon to Japan. I don't. I guess I use it. I did early on. I was like, yeah. I did use it for that stuff early on. I I actually don't think that those personal use cases are like easy to talk about, but they're not necessarily, I think that we'll get there. I don't think we're there yet. I don't think AI assistants are like good enough to, to take over everything. Basically, this AI stuff is just going to be integrated into Google. Your Google searches will become more effective. Great. I think but the way I think about it more as like, we had to have 30 freelance customer support staff, and now we don't. The experience is much better for our customers. They get their answers faster. The answers are more accurate. We don't have to deal with logistics of all that. If you are looking to switch into an industry, pick an industry that doesn't have a quota. Like doesn't have a sorry, that's a term from sales, but I just mean there's no.
It is a term from sales. Funny that you mentioned that.
Yeah, I guess I mean it as like, if you sell more, that's good, right? So as long as that's the case, as long as there's no like sense of you're just a cost setter, you want to be
basically.
Yeah,
of like the output that you can have. No, that makes.
And then I think it's fine. Yeah.
Cool. So I think we covered everything that we wanted to cover, plus a little bit more. We close off. Do you have any loose ends that you want to chat further about? Any thoughts? Any musings? Advice?
I don't. This was really fun, Tina. I admire you for running this program. Thanks for having me on. I don't necessarily. I'm no guru. I think I'm figuring it out like everyone else. But maybe that's interesting for people, right? You probably hear enough from the super famous people, so you can hear it from someone in the trenches.
I think the trenches have the most interesting stories personally. So
yeah,
I'm hoping there's listeners out there who found value in this conversation. Paul, thank you so much for joining. This has been lovely. And thank you for being so open about like your behind the scenes experiences.
Thank you for listening to the AI First Business Podcast. You can find more ways to connect with us in the description of this episode.